everybody. I think the last time I was in this hotel was for a high school winter formal. So it's nice to be back. I grew up in San Mateo County. I'm a Los Angeles-based reporter for KQED. My reporting has been in about 8 counties around California on heat in people's homes and people's workplaces. What we found across all these places, and with apologies to Supervisor Pine, we actually found 14 deaths in 2017 in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and San Francisco counties. We found disparities in outcomes. We found a lack of data that is actually really, really helpful to inform a lot of these decisions. And we found a real complexity in the kind of solutions that we'd be talking about. So I want to highlight some of the stories that we've found over the last several years in California. I'm starting out with slides of numbers because I work with a guy at KQED named Tedros Hallier, classic public radio name, and we have been playing around a lot with how to show people what's going on in heat and temperature. This is the year-to-date minimum temperature. This is from NOAA's Climate at a Glance tool. Coming off these very, very hot years, the green year is where we are now, and maybe that doesn't look so bad. But you can see the black here is the average, and you can see where we were a century ago. So this might not necessarily look so bad, this green year, but what this shows you is that the timelines are shifting. Another way that we've depicted rising heat at KQED in some of our reporting is we talk about kind of using the experience of the 1990s as a baseline. You can see the temperatures. This is the deviation from the baseline temperatures based on data from the Western Regional Climate Center. You can see that in the past it was much, much cooler, and what we're seeing now is a dramatic shift in the other direction. More recently, and Supervisor Pine mentioned this too, we reported on a Union of Concerned Scientists study. And what was interesting about that study was it didn't just look at temperatures, it looked at temperatures and humidity to find the heat index, which is what we did in our reporting. The heat index, they called it the feel-like temperature. And in San Mateo County, that doesn't always mean a great, great difference in terms of what we're talking about. But it's useful in looking at the overall picture for the Bay Area and for California. Limitations of the study were they only looked at the daily maximum average temperature, and what we found was that people were vulnerable at other temperatures at other times during the day. They only counted above 90-degree days, above 100-degree days, and then this is on the heat index scale, and then days that were like off the charts entirely, which we don't have here in San Mateo County or very often in the Bay. But it's a good start when you're thinking about how people experience things. So I just wanted to see if I could get a show of hands. How many people here have air conditioning? Yeah, not that many. How many people here are renters? Yeah, okay, me too. Do you or does anyone in your family have a respiratory problem, respiratory difficulty? There's a lot of vulnerability in this room. We went looking for vulnerable people all around the Bay Area, and it turned out to be hard to get people to participate, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So our reporting tactics are based on something called community-engaged journalism, which is just thinking about people as themselves sensors, thinking about people as data collectors. And people gather, this is both from, let me think about where this starts. A couple things happened. One, journalism's in a massive crisis, and we don't need to talk about that. But, so we try to do a better job of thinking about who our audience is and how to talk to people about what they care about. So that's one thing that happened. The other thing is there's that third logo down there that's called I See Change. That's a NASA-funded citizen science observation project. And I worked for that project before I worked for KQED for a few years. What we did was we encouraged people to tell us what they saw, and then we intersected their qualitative data with the actual data from NASA, the OCO2, the Orbiting Carbon Observatory, which took columnar measurements of carbon dioxide. So what we were trying to do was sort of try to provide some observation of the multiple ways that climate change affects people and that a changing carbon situation might affect people in various places. What we're trying to do is think about how people experience things. So this is a picture of my desk. I learned how to build sensors for this project a few years ago. It turns out you can still buy soldering kits in Radio Shacks, at least you could a couple of years ago. And at the time, we built sensors based on an Arduino, kind of an open source system. At the time, it seemed like a good idea. It was a lot of work. It turns out that there's actually cheaper ways to do this now. And so there's this whole DIY community that helped us do it. That's the package we used. It was, overall, even just to build it was not very expensive. It was like a $50 project, but there's kind of a way to keep going on that. So we ended up borrowing, in the Bay Area work that we did last year, we borrowed sensors from Arizona State University, these tiny little things that are about this big, that we hung in people's homes or gave to them to carry to work. We got this data from people in 10 cities and 4 counties in Northern California alone. The data extended over a period of about 3 weeks, 24 hours a day. We extracted and cleaned the data and we talked to people about it. So in San Francisco, I'm going to start here with the idea of kind of what I call an intersectional challenge. This is an intersection between the problem of how we provide healthcare to people, how we provide housing to people, and then heat itself. Floyd Ware is one of many people I talked to who live in a single-room occupancy style building around Market Street. I actually went to law school right around there, so I was in my old stomping grounds going into people's homes. It was kind of astoundingly hot. Last summer, if you remember, it wasn't hot at all in San Francisco. It was quite often foggy and cloudy. His house got to be 80 degrees a couple of times during this study. He's got an asthma problem. So when his doctor has told him, you got to call for an emergency, you got to call 911 every time you have an asthma flare-up. He, in this building, directly contributed to, his doctor told him this, asthma flare-ups that caused him to have to go to the hospital and he had to pay emergency room bills. He doesn't have money for emergency room bills. He's on disability. He's never going to be able to pay off that debt. We're talking about additional debt to someone specifically from that heat. So his doctor gave him some good guidance, but the systems don't intersect that to work well on it. Something else I call kind of an emerging challenge, and this is because, and I was talking to Matthew over here a little bit before this presentation, an emerging challenge that we found was the intersection of heat with housing. So a study that I found last year that kind of surprised me is that, and actually when you think about it, it's not a surprise at all, people spend as much as 60% of their time in their homes. Even in California, even where you can be outside, even where there's so many other places you can be. It's because you sleep in your home. So that takes up a huge amount of time. And if you have at least one meal there, all of a sudden it's adding up. So we found that housing conditions and access to support, particularly for renters, were kind of an issue. Getting people to talk to us about their vulnerability about this, particularly in the Bay Area, was really challenging. And I'll be really interested to hear from people who are going to be talking about the on-the-ground experiences, because I had quite a few of them. And we decided, in order to preserve our sensors, we borrowed sensors from an academic institution, so we had to make sure to get them back, right? They cost us money. So we budgeted for a cash reward to give people to return the sensors to us and the data. We didn't require anybody to talk to us in order to give us data. And we accepted sensors from anybody who spoke any language. And we did outreach in Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese, Spanish, and English. We had the hardest time getting people to even give us data. I was telling Matthew, we had about a dozen people who called us and said, I'm interested in participating. It gets very hot. I've passed out in my house before. I'm scared of destabilizing my housing. And we weren't able to use their data or talk to them in the end. I talked to people from faith-based organizations, healthcare organizations, legal aid, housing support, disabled support, veteran support, gay and lesbian support, regional neighborhood support. I had a lot of people say, I know there's somebody that you're describing, and they weren't able to talk to me. So that was particularly frustrating. I'm going to take you back to Pacoima is a neighborhood in the San Fernando Valley in Southern California. And you might think, the San Fernando Valley, it's really hot there. If you know anything about the San Fernando Valley, beyond like, I don't know, the movie Valley Girl or Kardashians or whatever, you might think that's a really different place than here. But what we saw, this is, that first period is about a 2-week period. This is a much shorter, this is about a 10-day period. What we saw in the blue is the outdoor temperature, the red is the indoor temperature. It was consistently hotter. We were a little surprised by this at first. It was consistently hotter inside homes. It turns out a lot of California homes graphs look like this. And this is a little bit different. I worked with a sister project in New York that measured heat in Harlem Heat. Did the same thing, put sensors inside people's homes, left them there for a long period of time. This particular temperature curve is very kind of specific to California and is a lot what California looks like. So you see these homes hold heat. People in this particular home describe putting their hands on the walls and feeling the heat in the wall. And so they don't get a restful sleep when they come home. There are other consequences to this too. This home belonged to a family where there was a teenage son who got migraines and nosebleeds every time it was hot. He also had developed behavioral problems in school. None of these things are tracked in the medical stuff that we're talking about. So, so that's a challenge. Ava Gonzalez is another person I spoke to who lives in North Hollywood. Oh, okay, yeah. Thank you. No, I'm trying to stay on track because I want to make sure that if there's questions so I'm skipping some of the sound clips. Okay. Thank you. So I'm skipping, I did include some sound clips from some of these people. We have a lot of these stories at 2 websites, kqed.org/heat and cityheatproject.org. Amy Gonzalez is another renter I talked to who I found actually through housing disputes in Los Angeles. There's a kind of a low-income housing dispute resolution service, and I've been trying to track housing disputes related to heat and air conditioning. She has no air conditioning. She has a limited ability to use it because of safety concerns. She was worried that if you put an air conditioner in the window, somebody could kick it in and break into her house. And that's a real concern in her neighborhood. Her kids got heat rashes. Doctors she went to see, trying to save her money, told her to use oatmeal baths to sort of smooth down the heat rash. It's an old home remedy. It actually works. But the doctors didn't know that she had not only cockroaches and holes in the wall, she had that wall heater. And in that wall heater is where the rats would come out at night. And so her kids were scared to get out of bed. And 2 of them returned to using diapers after stopping using diapers. You know, they ended up putting wood around the bottom of the wall heater. The landlord didn't like it. They're in a housing dispute about that. The paper plates are because she doesn't want to store any food in her house. The last time I talked to her in 2017. The last time I talked to her in 2018, it still wasn't resolved and she didn't have money to move. So that's a Southern California story, but there's something that sounds familiar to me about people who don't have money to move someplace else. And those are the kind of stories we're trying to find. I'm actually trying to play her sound clip, but I guess that's okay. So, we're talking a little bit about solutions. When you report on a story, as Supervisor Horsley said, this gets real depressing real fast. So what you want to do is try to figure out how to report on what's possible to do here. The solutions that are available to deal with heat that we found, can be connected to a lot of things. They could be connected to, dealing with housing as the issue. They could be connected to dealing with what's an emergency response, and we'll have some stories about skilled nursing facility in San Mateo County towards the end of the presentation. They could be connected to workplace issues, or there might be something of a scale or definitional mismatch if you're trying to do something landscape level. So in Los Angeles has gotten a huge amount of publicity about this. There's a lot of attention on this. In Los Angeles, the focus has been on kind of lowering the overall urban heat island temperature. They're taking a very engineering-based approach. They've mandated cool rooftops, which is something that if it actually goes the way they expect it to, will replace almost all of the rooftops, certainly on commercial buildings and business buildings within 20 years. Tree planting, which has a long and complicated and checkered history in Los Angeles, and cool pavement, which is what you see the guy doing in the picture here to the right. But what they don't know of their solution is, how does it actually affect the people who live in those neighborhoods? Does it lower their bills? Are people getting sick less often? How fast is it going to happen that Los Angeles is able to take this solution? So this solution works to overall lower the urban heat island effect. That's a really important goal. But if you're trying to address health risks, this may not be the only thing that you can do. Los Angeles also, and this is true of a lot of Northern California, I haven't made as comprehensive a look at the Northern California public school districts, but I believe this is the case. Los Angeles has 100% air-conditioned schools, which is not a small thing. It was quite a challenge for them to get it done. As we know, and we've seen studies from this, Harvard in particular had a couple of studies. There's a researcher there at Harvard who also works at UCLA. It actually affects people's test scores when it's too hot. Air conditioning is an obvious solution. Los Angeles has 100% air conditioning. But there is a massive maintenance backlog. So if your infrastructure isn't supported, you still see older schools losing air conditioning, kids getting more sick. And you can see this neighborhood, the central and southern neighborhood, is one of the poorer ones in Los Angeles. So the city focuses on making sure that it says it's got 100% air conditioning. But whether that actually supports 100% of the kids well is a different question. Now I want to talk to you about the stories that I found in 2017 in California. Colleen Loman was someone who lived in San Francisco, who died in her home. And we were surprised at how many people died in their homes. We said 79% of people in 2017 died in their homes. That's kind of not where you would expect people to die. In theory, neighbors check on you. In theory, you know each other. Colleen Loman grew up in this neighborhood, gave piano lessons in this neighborhood. Used to know everybody in this neighborhood, but San Francisco's been dramatically changing. And there's people who come in who don't know their old neighbors, and the old neighbors don't know the new people. And so Colleen Loman, let me see if I can play this clip. I don't know if it's working. It's okay. Colleen Loman had basically a woman who was like a daughter to her who was away from where she was. And that daughter called her every half hour, every few minutes. The clip I was going to play was just the sound of her and her husband calling in on the 911. Eventually they found her in her home. She didn't realize the risk she had taken by being in that home. And we saw that happen in Contra County too. So this is a story of a woman named Ruth Mistles, who's a renter who we met in Antioch last year. The gap between how hot it is in her house and how cool it is dramatic. There's support for people to pay their bills. If you're a low-income person and you qualify for what's called the LIHEAP program, you can get support for your air conditioning bill. But Rose didn't want to use her 1 month of support from the LIHEAP program because she wanted to save it for winter time, because the house gets very, very cold in the winter time. And so right now in the Bay Area, you've got this kind of balanced concern between people who are worried that their homes that are poorly insulated are so cold that they're going to be too cold in the wintertime versus how they're going to be in the summertime. Very quickly, I also just want to say, we talked to workers all over California and we measured their heat burden on the job. This is a picture of a man at the port of Los Angeles who worked in an uninsulated building. He described licking his finger and touching it and it making a sound when he would touch the walls of this thing. The state is undergoing a process where they're trying to regulate indoor heat, and it's going to take a whole other year because they have to assess the economic costs of it. But right now what we see is that the adaptation costs have been shifted to warehouse workers, to people who work in high-rise buildings where the heat's turned off at the end of the day, which is something that happens in the Bay Area, to people who package goods to the meal kits. There's a meal kit factory somewhere in the Bay Area that I tried to get into where that's a problem.
During one evening in July, even at 10 p.m., it still felt like 94 degrees inside.
Desesperante, horrible.
After a year there, Rebecca knew tricks to cool down, using cardboard as a fan, using battery-powered fans.
So the point of that clip was just to tell you that that's a woman who experienced heat on the job that caused her to faint. She had to go, usually for workers, you have to go through a process to get medical support. Her employer didn't provide medical support. She went to a doctor who told her that she was heat sick, and the employer refused to accept that information. This chart's just meant to show you that the risk is not particular to a time of day, that it can happen at a lot of different times of the day. I want to tell you very briefly, I have to wrap up, but I want to tell you very briefly this story because it's really important. This is a story of a woman who died at St. Francis Pavilion in the fall of 2017 when it was incredibly hot. It's hard to confirm what happened inside St. Francis Pavilion. I wasn't able to talk to the people who run the facility. They refused to comment to me. But from her coroner's report in San Mateo County, I was able to find out that she had a temperature of 103 degrees in her bed when she was found at night. It was after 10 o'clock at night. The temperature outside was still 85 degrees. She died at the hospital with a temperature of 106 degrees. This is inside a skilled nursing facility. Skilled nursing facilities, even ones this old, have to maintain temperatures that are comfortable and safe. The North County Fire Authority actually wrote up a report, and that's what's put up here. And without them, I wouldn't have been able to confirm this information. Fire department officials saw what was going on there, talked about it. I have radio chatter that we played in a story on the website. They said it was so bad that they had to bring blowers into the facility and blow the hot air out. We heard stories like this over and over again from emergency room doctors, from first responders who said, I heard from emergency room doctors who got calls from San Mateo County, skilled nursing facilities and licensed care homes saying this is a real problem. And the emergency room can't handle supporting what are supposed to be licensed care facilities that are supposed to be doing their job. So it's very hard to fully ascertain what's going on. The California Department of Public Health investigated this and has not found a problem. But this is the kind of thing where we see that there are systems in place that are having a hard time adapting to changing risks. So as you think about this today, all I'm trying to ask you to do is say, how do you identify the problem? Who do you identify as vulnerable? And how are you going to decide what your success is in responding to it? Are your solutions tailored to the problem? Thank you. I managed to say somewhat on time, so we have time for questions.
Thank
if
you,
you
Molly.
have
That is great. Actually, we actually have time for a couple of questions.
Okay, thank you. Sam Thielen, City of Millbrae. My question was for the participants in the studies that you were doing at SROs. Did they give you a reason why they didn't want to participate or provide the information?
By the way, people in SROs love participating. They
Yeah.
wanted to talk all day long about what was going on.
But they didn't want to provide the data. Was that related to HIPAA or was that related to?
No, the people I got calls from specifically were in, I got calls from people in San Mateo County and from Santa Clara County. So they weren't in SROs, they were in these peninsula counties. And they said that their concern was, and I had this problem a lot, people thought sensors, you say sensors to people, sometimes they freak out. I did sensors in Southern California in a primarily Spanish-speaking Mexican neighborhood in the fall of 2016. People threw away their sensors. Once Donald Trump started talking about immigration, people literally threw away the sensors. Or this one woman saved it for me because she knew I had built it, but she wrapped it in foil, inside a plastic bag, inside a paper bag, and stuck it in a cabinet. With the Bay Area problem, the problem we had was that people felt that if they gave data about their landlord, that their landlord could use that to evict them. So it had nothing to do with health, which was really sad.
Hi, Ann Schneider, also from Millbrae. I'm a landlord in Mountain View. I'm moving in new tenants right now, and the first time in 13 years I've got people asking for air conditioning. The house is passive solar. I've installed everything except air conditioning. And I've got the dilemma, I work in the environmental field. You add air conditioning, you add increase of electricity use, so you're adding greenhouse gases. For everybody out here, my problem is the house used to have 5 additional trees, but the HOA came and cut down the trees. So now that sun bakes my front rooms on there for 3 years. I've been fighting the HOA to replace trees. And most entities don't respect trees. So I'd love to hear more about trees and air conditioning. A lot of us are house rich, and $8,000 to go buy an air conditioning unit is a year's worth of profit.
Yeah, and we hear that story a lot, and I don't mean to suggest that all landlords, my dad's a landlord too. Yeah, it's a complicated problem, and the reason I got into this problem is because I lived in a place that didn't have air conditioning, and then I had to decide to buy one, and I had to decide, I'm an environmental reporter, so I was like, is there another option? And I have a tree, but it belongs to the neighbor, and the neighbor decided to prune it back, and then there goes the protection. So this problem with HOAs is you're not the only person who's talked about this. This is a problem I've heard about in about 6 counties in California. And people want to resolve this problem locally more than anything. You even see this, Los Angeles, which is attempting to be so forward-thinking and put in 1 million trees. This has been a discussion there for a decade. They also have street services, and street services needs to prune the trees back. They ran into a massive problem in the city of Los Angeles where the best shade trees pull up the sidewalks. So the sidewalks are then ruined and create a massive liability for them in the settlement that they have to create. So this is a really intersectional problem with trees. People also talk about alternatives. We were on forum a few weeks ago talking about heat. I guess it was maybe, a couple weeks ago. And somebody proposed shades. Like there's a lot of architectural, there's design stuff around shades, which also tends to run afoul of HOAs. So I don't know how to solve an HOA problem. I wish I did.
Molly is going to be around, so I would encourage you all to connect with her during the break and after as well. Let's thank her once again. All right, we're going to move into the next set of presentations, which is going to be looking at more at the current conditions and the lived experiences. So we have Rita Mancera, Executive Director with Convening. She will present on climate change, heat, and agricultural workers in San Mateo County, followed by Travis Kuzman, who is the Associate Director of Emergency Medical Services with the county, and will speak to the climate conditions and health and the public safety power shutoffs that are being put in place by PG&E. So I'll start with Rita to join us.